Hi everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. For the purposes of this session, we're going to discuss how rules across Europe vary when you're advertising your medicines and medical devices in social media, and how the European position is distinct from the more relaxed regime in the US. My name is Sonal Patel-Oliva, and I'm a director in our London office. I will be chairing today's webinar, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues from across our offices. We have Sebastian Prado from our Paris office, Gemma Colomer from our Barcelona office, Katarina Schleck from our Munich office, Diego Rigatti from our Milan office, Philip Reinisch from our Vienna office, and Tali Dvorkis, who is a US qualified lawyer in our London office. As you all know, advances in technology and evolving marketing techniques have transformed the healthcare sector. Companies are able to reach wider audiences through social media, both through their own channels and also through paid-for media. This provides for many more opportunities for companies, and due to the ability to change content more quickly and easier than traditional forms of media, this can also lead to a much more adventurous and higher risk approach to social media advertising. However, it can also lead to blurring the lines between what is and what is not permitted. For example, social media platforms are flooded with posts promoting prescription-only medicines such as hair loss, weight loss, skin problems, wrinkles, and hay fever. However, the social media adverts for these products give the appearance of cosmetics products, even though they are prescription only. And adverts for prescription-only products, as you all know, are prohibited in Europe, and regulators are proactively investigating these types of companies and their activity on social media that's breaching this rule. So how do you navigate the variation of rules across Europe when advertising in social media? For the purposes of today, we thought that it would be helpful for our panel to give you a flavour of the rules in their respective jurisdictions. We will start with the general advertising position, and then we'll move on to look at some general social media activity examples. We'll be covering 7 different countries today, so as you will appreciate, we will not be able to do a deep dive and cover everything that you need to know in a 1-hour webinar. However, we are aiming to share some interesting insights with you today. We also understand that not all areas will be of interest to everyone due to the nature of your product or due to the nature of your proposed marketing activities and strategies. Therefore, we would be happy to discuss these matters further with you offline, and we recommend that you reach out to us for specific advice in relation to your products and your specific jurisdictions that you cover. Before we start, I just want to mention that we are recording this session and that all attendees are muted. However, we should have some time at the end to answer questions. So if you do have a question, please feel free to type it into the question box and we will select a few at the end to go through. So let's get started with the general position when advertising your medicines and medical devices. In the first part, we will look at the general question: can medicines and medical devices be advertised to the public? As mentioned just now, there is a consensus across Europe that advertising of prescription-only medicines is prohibited. However, over-the-counter medicines can generally be advertised, provided that they are compliant with local regulatory requirements, including licensing and marketing authorizations, and provided that they comply with relevant advertising rules. It may seem obvious to you that medicines and medical devices need to be licensed in order to be advertised. However, we have seen some companies trying to promote unlicensed products. This includes promotion prior to obtaining a license and marketing authorization, using medicinal claims in connection with cosmetics products, and marketing products as though they're cosmetics, even though they need a prescription from a healthcare professional. In the UK, we have 2 categories of over-the-counter medicines. We have general sale products and products that are sold under the supervision of a pharmacist. Both sets of products can be advertised provided that they hold the relevant licenses, registrations and marketing authorizations issued by the UK regulator, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency. Medical devices also need to meet specific standards of safety, quality and efficiency. As such, devices to be marketed in Great Britain must bear a UKCA mark, and devices to be marketed in Northern Ireland must bear a CE mark. Therefore, it's really important to know that if your product is only licensed in part of the UK, so for example, only in Great Britain or only in Northern Ireland, then it can only be advertised in that region. And in order for you to do UK-wide advertising, the product must be licensed separately in both Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, in relation to general advertising rules, the rules that apply, the position is quite similar in the UK and Germany, which are at the more liberal end of the scale. Katharina, could you briefly talk us through some of the general rules of advertising medicines and medical devices?
Thank you, Sonal. It's my pleasure to briefly summarize the general advertising rules in Germany. Regarding prescription-only medicinal products, promotional activities addressed to the general public are prohibited. The situation is different, however, with non-prescription medicinal products, so-called over-the-counter or OTC medicinal products. In Germany, the general rule is that promotional activities for OTC medicinal products to the general public are permitted. Please note that this rule only applies to already authorized or so-called licensed OTC medicinal products. Please also note that for an advertising activity to be admissible under German law, the mandatory legal requirements must be complied with, which place strict demands on the design and the claims of the advertising. An exhaustive list of all the regulations to be observed when designing advertising measures and claims for OTC medicinal products is unfortunately beyond the scope of this webinar. However, I'm very pleased to provide a rough overview of the standard and most important regulations of the German Drug Advertising Act, which must be adhered to. One of these general statutory rules is that the advertising activities must be true and not misleading. Further, promotional activities aimed at children and young people under the age of 14 is not permitted. The so-called ban on comparative advertising also applies to Germany. This means that medicinal products may not be advertised with claims that suggest that the effect of a medicinal product is superior or equivalent to another medicinal product. Further, advertising measures that cause so-called concerns for health among the general public are also prohibited. This prohibition includes advertising that establishes a link between the use of a medicinal product and the prevention of a certain disease. I have now only mentioned a few examples that give a rough overview of the advertising rules, or rather the advertising bans in Germany regarding OTC medicinal products. Before we move on to medical devices and then some other countries in Europe, I would like to point out that there are exceptions to this general rule that OTC medicinal products may be advertised to the general public. The German Drug Advertising Act stipulates that certain products may not be advertised even though there are OTC medicinal products and not prescription-only medicinal products. According to this exception, medicinal products containing psychotropic active substances with a risk of addiction and which are intended to eliminate insomnia or mental disorder or influence moods, as well as medicinal products approved for the purpose of emergency contraception, may not be advertised to the general public. Now to medical devices. Regarding medical devices, promotional activities to the general public are permitted. Since the introduction of the European Medical Device Regulation, parts of the medical device advertisement has been harmonized. According to Article 7 of the European Medical Device Regulation, all medical device promotional materials must be corresponding to the intended purpose of the respective device. This means that the promotion on off-label use is prohibited. The promotional claims must further be true and not misleading, and the promotional activities must draw a realistic picture of the benefits and the risks of the respective devices. However, the provisions in the European Medical Device Regulation are not exhaustive. Rather, they are supplemented and extended by the respective national laws in the EU. In Germany, this means particularly that some of the advertising bans stipulated in the German Drug Advertising Act apply accordingly to medical devices and must be also observed. We will soon find out about special features in other countries from my colleagues.
Thanks very much, Katerina. That's really helpful, very comprehensive. Very similar rules here in the UK, except that we define children as under 16. Philip, do you have any additional points that you would like to add for Austria?
Yes, happy to view an Austrian point of view. As you can see from the table, Austria is generally in line with the other countries when it comes to prescription and OTC medicine. However, certain medical devices are prohibited from being advertised. These include prescription medical devices and devices intended exclusively for use by HCPs on patients. This means that OTC devices can really be advertised under Austrian law, and such advertising is subject to various restrictions. For example, the advertising should not be false or misleading, should not claim the device is equivalent or better than competitor devices, nor include imagery or changes of the body.
Thanks, Philip. And in contrast to some of the position in Germany and the UK, Italy has a much more formal pre-authorization requirement when it comes to advertising. Diego, can you tell us a bit more about the position in Italy, please?
Let's say that we share the same common EU directive. So let's say the bulk of the regulation is the same. But in Italy, being a little more bureaucratic, the Commission is appointed by the Ministry of Health. And we had in the past some issues with the slowness of the approvals. So a mechanism of automatic acceptance in case of lack of response within 90 days from the request has been introduced with some subtleties. There are some exceptions, especially depending if it's the first request, if the renewal, if you're talking about typical and ordinary pharma products or homeopathic products. But apart from that, the legislation is fairly similar. What has to be done in Italy is also that the authorization has to be always explicitly mentioned in any advertising, and it lasts for 24 months and has to be renewed.
Great, thanks so much, Diego. And Sebastian, in France, I understand that the rules vary depending on whether a product is reimbursable. Can you talk us through that point in France, please?
Yes, sorry for the line. Yes, for OTC product, it's possible to advertise this type of product to the general public, as long as the drug medicine product is not subject to a medical prescription. And in addition, this product must not be reimbursed by the social security system. And then the marketing authorizations must not prohibit any restrictions concerning this advertisement. And the advertisement concerning this type of OTC products must be accompanied by a message of caution and a reference to consult a physician if symptoms persist. So that's for the OTC product. And we also have specific rules concerning medical devices. So there are two types of medical devices which are reimbursed by the Social Security, and medical devices which are not reimbursed by the Social Security. So for the first one, medical devices which are reimbursed by the Social Security system, it's possible to advertise to the general public only for medical devices of class 1 and 2A, and it's not possible for class 2B and 3. And for non-reimbursable products, well, it's possible to advertise for class 1 and class 2A, but it's possible to advertise for the other type of medical device, which with an a priori control of the and authorizations of the competent authority. And this a priori control targets medical devices which are on the list of medical devices which presenting significant risk for the human health. So it's basically medical device of class 2B and 3, and it's dermal filler for skin depressions.
Great, thank you, Sebastian. Well, it sounds like at the least restrictive end of the scale for medical devices, we've got Germany and the UK, and then up at the other end, we have Austria, France, Italy, and Spain. And Gemma, would you like to tell us a bit more about medical devices that are restricted from being advertised in Spain, please?
Yes, thank you, Sonal. Yes, in Spain, the situation in relation to promotion of medical devices to the general public will also be a little bit similar than the situation in Austria, meaning that it's not permitted to promote to the general public those medical devices that are financed by the national health system, also prescription medical devices, and also those that have to be used or applied by healthcare professionals. Also, it's important that in Spain, it has been clarified by a rule which are those medical devices to be considered prescription medical devices that would be the ones that could not be promoted to the public. And law has established that those would be those product medical devices that are custom-made devices, also devices that have been manufactured following the prescription of someone, those that are financed by national health systems, those that require an individual adaptation, and finally, as I mentioned, also devices that are exclusively used or applied by healthcare professionals. All those types of medical devices will be considered prescription medical devices under Spanish law, and promotion to the general public would not be permitted, meaning that only promotion to healthcare professionals in restricted areas would be permitted.
Great, thanks so much, Gemma. We've just heard varying restrictions across Europe. Tali, can you give us the position in the US just seems so much more relaxed. Can you please give us a bit of a view on whether it is as relaxed as it appears?
Sure, of course. And anyone who spent any time in the US or on YouTube watching any sort of broadcasting, whether it's online, television, you would have seen advertisements for drugs, along with a list of 10 to 12 side effects at the end. But healthcare generally is a very different system in the US. It's much more consumer driven. And as a result, there's a lot also there are no restrictions on advertising, be it prescription-only medicines, over-the-counter medicines, or medical devices directly to consumers. So you do have these advertisements. Now, in terms of what you can say there, it's similar to what you are allowed to say in Europe for those products that you are allowed to advertise. Has to be truthful, can't be misleading, has to be consistent with product labeling. You have to include all relevant information. And of course, any product that has not yet been approved cannot be advertised.
Great, so that helps us sort of lay the groundwork of the contrast between both sides of the pond. So let's move on to the core of the discussion for this panel today. As mentioned earlier, social media offers an array of opportunities for companies when promoting their products and services. It allows companies to share information and content in a different way to traditional media. Content is much more easily accessible on the go via tablets and mobile phones. Content can be much more engaging and interactive with the public. And we're seeing an increase in social media posts, stories, reels, photos, videos on companies' own social media pages. But we're also seeing an increase in sponsored and paid for content, as well as content created by patients and healthcare professionals. Now, when we talk about advertising in social media in the UK, the first key point to note is that you need to apply the same rules to your social media advertising that you apply to all of your other advertising in any other media, such as print, TV, radio, your website, etc. There are, of course, limitations on who can provide testimonial content, what disclosures need to be made, etc. And we will look at these in due course. But in the UK, we don't have a separate list of rules that only apply to social media advertising or anything that is specific to social media advertising. So you still need to apply advertising rules that are set out in the UK advertising codes issued by the UK advertising regulator, the Blue Guide that's issued by the MHRA, and the requirements of any professional codes of conduct. All of those factors still come into play. And also, just like with all other advertising, the primary responsibility for the content and the dissemination of that advertising lies with the license holder. Some of the other countries in Europe do have some specific rules on advertising on social media. And so to discuss these variations, we thought that it would be helpful to talk through some examples. Now, the first example that we've got here on our screen relates to prescription-only medicines. And we mentioned earlier that advertising of prescription-only medicines to consumers is prohibited in Europe. We also mentioned that these types of social media posts are being investigated by regulators. However, it seems that the US is quite distinct. And so just before we move on, I'd like to just come back to you, Tali, and just to talk about, how and why prescription medicines can be promoted in the US.
Of course, and as mentioned, because generally you can promote directly to consumers, we see a lot of that. Now, specifically with social media, as with the UK, there aren't specific laws restricting advertising on social media. Rather, general advertising rules would apply. However, the FDA did put out in 2014 draft guidance documents. Draft guidance are tools that the FDA has used to show the general thinking behind a topic, but they do not have the full force of law until they become final. Now, these documents relating to social media advertising, they're still in draft guidance form. That said, though, the FDA is looking at what companies are putting out there, including in social media. In 2022, Eli Lilly was cited for an Instagram post relating to a diabetes drug for failing to include all relevant information. There was also a letter to Bausch Health that had a promotional video for a psoriasis drug. The ad featured a woman of childbearing age, but the FDA felt that it did not include enough warnings related to warnings that are specific to women of childbearing age. So the FDA is looking at what companies are doing with social media, even though it's allowed. It's not the complete Wild West.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's not a complete free-for-all. We need to be just as conscious, like in the UK, about the actual content that's going in, the claims that you're making sure that all of the mandatory information is there as well. That's really helpful, Tali. Thank you. So moving on to our second example. Often, when a product can't be advertised to the general public, like in the case of prescription-only medicines, companies still want to be able to share information about a condition or a disease through their social media channels, and they still want to be able to provide information to and engage with their consumer public. The position is consistent across Europe. Philip, do you want to share some information about those rules that apply across Europe?
Yes, Sonal, certainly. Well, the position across Europe is varied when it comes to advertising around disease-related information. For example, in Austria, it is permitted to provide information about a disease to the public or generally raise awareness about a certain condition. But such information should not make reference in any way to a particular product or a particular brand. Doing so could be seen as advertising that product or providing some sort of testimonial or recommendation, which would then be subject to different regulations. I think this position is also similar in Spain and the UK. In Germany, advertising for medicines and medical devices should not refer to certain diseases as detailed in the relevant legislation. Examples include addictions and cancerous tumors. This means that advertising specifically to the general public should not make reference to the detection, prevention, elimination, or elevation of these listed diseases. Finally, in the US, the position is much more relaxed, as we can see generally across each of the topics covered today, I guess.
Great, thank you, Philip. Yeah, you're right. It is pretty similar here in the UK. You know, companies can provide information, promote awareness. It's more about education, about a condition, disease, or health, and their management, provided that we don't reference brands and product names. So moving on to our third example. This example is what springs to mind when we think about social media advertising. You can see that we have, if we look at the example, we've broken it up into 3 parts. The original post, which is highlighted in green, is an advert for a range of Vicks products. It's obviously advertising. It's been published by the brand on the brand channel, and it can be easily identifiable as advertising. The product is an over-the-counter product, and therefore most places it will be generally possible to advertise the product, provided you're complying with all of the relevant points that we have discussed so far. However, if you look at this example, there are also 2 more pieces of content. And the question is, how do we view this content and how do we treat these pieces of content? Are they advertising? Are they not advertising? Well, let's take the first one, which is highlighted in blue. So content that's created by users of social media platforms without any involvement of the brand is known as user-generated content. For example, when a user posts a comment on its own timeline, or they post a comment in response to a brand post, like this text in blue, it would be considered user-generated content and not advertising at this stage. However, I think the key point to note for brands is that it can become advertising if the brand engages with that comment. So, for example, let's do a personal example. If I were to post a video about being struck down by a cold or flu, and I share a video about all of the medicines that I've been taking to make me feel better, that content in itself is not advertising. Equally, if I respond to an advert about a cough medicine and say that it's the best cough medicine on the market, at this point, my post is not advertising. However, when the brand then starts to engage with my comment, or in the case of this example, the comment in blue, it will become advertising. So in the comment in blue, you'll see that the user has said, opens up my sinuses in minutes. At the moment that the user has put that up, like we've mentioned, user-generated content, not advertising. But the moment that Vicks US have engaged with that content, so the content that's highlighted in pink, what they have done is they have changed that user-generated content into what is now seen as advertising and into what the brand is now responsible for. So that statement, it opens up my sinuses in minutes, on the assumption that there is no relationship between the brand and the comment user, becomes advertising, and the advertiser now, so the brand, now has to make sure that it has sufficient evidence to support the claim, opens up my sinuses in minutes. So social media admin need to be very careful about the type of content that they are engaging in, the type of content that they're liking or responding to. This type of activity is permitted in the UK. It's fine in relation to over-the-counter medicines and medical devices, provided that A, the content is compliant, B, the brand holds the relevant supporting evidence, and C, the brand has obtained relevant consents from the user. Now, if we're looking at the example on the screen, you don't need express consent from that user to respond to that comment, because that is part of the functionality of the social media platform. So if you want to like or respond to a comment, you don't need consent. However, if you wanted to take that statement, opens up my sinuses in minutes, and use it in another place, for example, on your website or in your marketing, in that scenario, you would need to obtain consent from the user. So let's have a look at how this varies across Europe. Katerina, the general advertising points are pretty much the same to consider across a number of countries. Do you mind starting us off with a high-level summary?
Thank you, Sonal. Yes, I would love to. So as you can see, in Germany, Austria, UK, and Spain, the regulations are quite similar. So in all those countries, no specific statutory rules govern the advertising of medicinal products on social media. Instead, the general rules, as in print media, for example, apply. As mentioned before, promotional activities for prescription-only medicinal products to the general public are not permitted. Therefore, promotion activities regarding prescription-only medicinal products on social media must also adhere to this rule. Accordingly, on social media platforms such as Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, such promotional activities are not permitted. The background to this is that it cannot be ensured that the promotional activities are available exclusively for the professional community, such as HCPs. However, this may be different on LinkedIn. The reason for this is that LinkedIn offers the opportunity to form closed groups. This makes it possible to ensure that the advertising measures for prescription-only medicinal products are only accessible to members of the professional community. With regards to the implementation of the advertising measures, the legal requirements, as previously already discussed, must be observed too, as well. In addition to these rules, some general further rules apply as well. Such mandatory implementations must be included when using promotional claims on social media. In Germany, for example, this means that the sentence for risk and side effects, ask your doctor or pharmacist, must also be included in a social media promotion. The same applies when using disease-related information. It is generally allowed to promote medicinal products by using disease-related information. However, the reproduction of medical history or reference thereto must observe certain legal standards. In Germany, this means that such information or content is not allowed to be performed in an improper, repulsive, or misleading manner. Thank you. Sonal.
Great, thanks, Katerina. There's also an interesting point to note when it comes to Spain. Gemma, can you please tell us about how the authorities in Spain are viewing different platforms and whether that applies to advertising to consumers or HCPs?
Yes, Sonal. Yes. In fact, as mentioned, in Spain, there is not a specific regulation in relation to the use of social media in relation to promotion to medicinal products or medical devices. However, it is true that certain competent authorities competent for the promotion of medicinal products specifically have issued certain position in relation to social media, stating that, for example, platforms of social media as Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube would not be admitted in any case to in relation to medicinal products, prescription medicinal products. The fact for this is that, in fact, as mentioned, all these are platforms open to the public, and therefore it cannot be granted a restricted use of those. So this would not be permitted. However, they have mentioned that LinkedIn would be a platform that it could be used for promotion of medicinal products, prescription medicinal products, stating, of course, that all the rest of the requirements for the promotion have to be met. Also, competent authorities have mentioned that in case for those medicinal products that do admit promotion to the general public, social media would be admitted, but they have also stated that limitations of the general rules have to be observed, in the sense that this use of the social media for these products that admit promotion to the general public cannot be in any case linked to a prescription medicinal products. So this would be in the case that this is made, it would be an indirect promotion to prescription medicinal product, which is not permitted.
Thanks, Gemma. And Diego, Italy goes one step further in terms of its restrictions and interactions with consumers. Do you want to talk us through that scenario, please?
Yeah, I don't know if to define this a step forward or backward, because the approach of the Italian minister is simply to consider advertising, or better, the pages and typical tools of social media as a pure advertising. So they are admissible as for the usual channels of advertising. So you cannot, of course, advertise prescription-only medicines and the like. The prior authorization is required as for the standard advertising. And what is the, let's say, characteristical, the features of the social media have to be somehow muted. So what is usually a very dynamic tool to bring, to bring the advertising to the masses. In this case, it has to be completely muted, completely annulled. So for instance, the comment and reactions tools have to be disabled. The sharing function must be disabled too. And if this is not feasible because of the nature of the platform, there has to be a disclaimer saying that you are exiting the area that has been authorized by the minister. The same is for the links. Whenever it brings and leads the viewer to a third-party website or another channel, in this case, it's possible only in two cases. Either the link brings you to a very generic web page or other web platform with no, let's say, advertising content, or has to be included in the original request of authorization to the Ministry of Health and considered as a whole. Even the stories, another powerful tool of the social media, are somehow limited. You can have max of 10 posts, 3 videos, and 70 words overall. And you can ask for a story if unless after 45 days before the prior one authorized. So the tendency is to reduce the social media advertising to a static advertising as on the other web pages and websites.
Great, thanks, Diego. Sebastian, there are also a few points to consider for France, aren't there? Do you want to talk us through those?
Yes, of course, Tonal, thank you. Yes, so the advertisement must comply with the German rules, meaning it must be true and not misleading, but you need to put mandatory information in mandatory provision on advertisement for medical devices as well as drugs. And it's always a question when we work for clients to review their advertisement campaign. There's always question concerning the size, the place to put the mandatory information such as the name of the product or the good use. So it's quite easy to answer this type of question when the advertisement is on the paper or a newspaper, but it's more difficult on social media. So that means it will not be, from my perspective, it will not be not possible on Twitter, but it will be possible on the website. But bear in mind that you must add some mandatory provision. And on some website or social media, there is this functionality, this bottom X people like. And if I'm a patient, if I click on it, other patients could consider that the number of people likes 100,000 mean it's a certificate of cure. So that means this type of functionality must be deactivated. And that's the same if I'm a physician. So if I click on it, patients could understand that it's recommendations to use the medicine product. So this, again, this type of functionality must be disabled, deactivated. So that means for certain websites such as LinkedIn, it will not be possible to advertise on it because it's not possible for you. You can't deactivate this type of functionality on LinkedIn. And there is some question concerning discussion forum. It's possible to open a discussion forum on your website, but you need to moderate it within every 24 hours. So that means if you find there is something which is wrong, a comment which is wrong, you must either comment it, correct it, or you can remove it from the discussion forum. And if you see that on the discussion forum, which is run by a third party, a patient, or I don't know what. If there is a wrong information concerning your product, you have the possibility, you are allowed to modify or put comments on this forum, but your comments cannot be an advertisement for your product.
Great, thank you, Sebastian. And that neatly takes us on to our last example. So our last example relates to testimonials, another area which has opened up considerably due to social media when promoting your products and services. And as you'll see from the screen, testimonials can be presented in many forms, in the form of a review before and after, a user testimonial, content created by influencers and brand ambassadors, patient case studies, etc. You know, they come in many forms. And as we've mentioned before, if such content derives from a user who has no relationship with the brand, then that content becomes advertising when the company engages with or adopts the content. But testimonial content can also be created through collaborations and commercial relationships between the brand and an individual content creator. For example, you might work with patients or healthcare professionals who act as your brand ambassador, or individuals who are quite influential in spreading information within a specific sector, for example, within the healthcare space. And they might commit to a different range of activities. So you might have an ambassador who does a certain number of social media posts over a certain period of time. You may have others who also engage in PR activities and speaking slots. You have others who might take part, for example, in a photo shoot or a film, you know, content that you are creating for your own advertising channels where you want third parties to feature. And all of these relationships can vary. They can be formal, informal. You may or may not have contracts in place. Obviously, having a contract in place puts you in a much better position in terms of protecting you. But there is a wide variety of relationships that can take place. And some may involve monetary payment, some might involve free gifts or the loan of a product or some other form of consideration, for example, an invite to an event or a launch party. There's also a variation in terms of the level of involvement that the company has. So you might, on one end of the scale, the company may provide nothing apart from the free gift or free product, and then just let the influencer and ambassador create their own content. Then moving up the sliding scale, you might have a company that provides hashtags or guidance on what they want you to talk to. And then right at the end of the other scale, you will then have companies who want to control the content and make sure that they are approving content and the messaging is on brand, etc. So a very big range that you have there. Now, in the UK, patient testimonials are permitted for both medicines and medical devices. However, healthcare professionals and celebrities can only be used in connection with medical devices, and only provided that they don't compromise their obligation to provide impartial advice to patients in the case of HCPs. Advertisements for medicines should not contain any material which refers to recommendations by scientists or healthcare professionals, or any recommendations by celebrities who, just by the status of their celebrity, could encourage consumption of a product. Advertisers also, as we've mentioned, need to make sure that they obtain all of the necessary written consents to those testimonials, keep written records of consents, and they have a written record of how those consents and where they can be used, whether that is by geographical scope or in a particular campaign or a particular publication. And all content posted by brand ambassadors and influencers that are engaged by companies also need to make sure that they contain clear disclosures to make their relationships with brands clear. Now, those disclosures allow consumers to understand what level of control the brand has over the content and whether or not any consideration has been given, any incentive for that testimonial. And examples of disclosures include hashtag ad, hashtag free gift, hashtag sponsored, and the use of the correct hashtag will depend on the factors of that particular relationship. Now, Sebastian, let me come back to you. I understand that there are conflicting rules in France, and therefore there was a much more conservative approach shown on the table. Do you mind sharing some further details with us while I click into the table?
Yes, thank you, sir. So the conflicting rules, from my perspective, applies for medicinal products. medical device, sorry. But for medical product, it's not possible to refer in an advertisement to any type of recommendation issued by scientific healthcare professional or person who are not scientific or healthcare professional, but who have a kind of reputation. So that means, from my perspective, it's not possible to have testimonials. It's more difficult for medical devices. Indeed, the French Public Health Code allows this type of testimonies for HCPs and for people who have a type of reputation for class 1 and class 2A of medicine of medical device. So that would mean it would be possible to have in certain circumstances testimonial from patients or celebrities. But the competent authority issued guidelines, which are more than guidelines. And for the French competent authority, when you are advertised on medical device concerning claims, properties, clinical results, all this type of informations must be supported by clinical data. So that means that the conclusion of the competent authority that patients and professional testimonial are excluded. So if you want to use that type of tools, you must be very cautious. That's why I took a very conservative position here.
Great, thank you, Sebastian. And Gemma, do you want to talk about through the restrictions in Spain when it comes to testimonials?
Sure, Sonal, thank you. Yes, in Spain, testimonials from HCP or from celebrities are not admissible, neither for OTC medicine, neither for medicinal products. This is something that comes from law, and in those cases, HCP or celebrities testimonials are not permitted. However, testimonials from patients are permitted in both cases in relation to OTC medicines and medical devices. Of course, there are certain requirements that have to be met in order to use testimonials from patients. Testimonials cannot be misleading. Content also cannot create a health alarm. Also, of course, testimonials cannot include in any way an indirect promotion to a prescription medicinal product, again, which is the main prohibition. And also, in case that someone a company wants to use those testimonials from patients, data protection regulations have to be met, and consent from patients have also to be met. So this would be the main framework in relation to testimonials in Spain.
Thanks, Gemma. Diego, do you want to add anything for Italy?
Yeah, for once in Italy, we are a little bit more open. Let's say that the Italian authorities don't focus so much on who's, bringing the advertising message to the consumers, but more on the content. So bloggers, celebrities, influencers, also the micro influencers, so-called, are admitted as long as the advertising per se is authorized. What has to be clear is it's advertising has to be clearly disclosed. So with the ASH advertising or promoted or sponsored and so on. So as long as it's clear it's advertising, it doesn't matter that much who's conveying the message to the market.
Thanks, Diego. Philip, do you want to share some information about Austria?
Actually, this is quite easy to say because Austria, in this special regard, kind of linked up totally up to the German situation, and it is the same. The testimonials from HCPs and celebrities are not permitted by law to do the advertising. However, patient testimonials are not permitted in relation to the over-counter medication in Austria. For the total overview in Germany and Austria, I would kindly ask Katharina to give us an overview.
Yes, thank you, Philip. So the general rule in Germany is that the testimonials from HCPs and celebrities, also including influencers related to over-the-counter medicinal products, are not permitted. What is permitted, however, is the use of patient testimonials. And this includes, for example, also patients' own medical histories, as well as an expression of thanks. However, care must be taken to ensure that those testimonials are not made in an abusive, repulsive, or misleading manner, and further also all the other legal requirements must be always adhered to. Regarding medical devices, testimonials from HCPs, celebrities, and influencers, as well as from patients, may be used for promotional claims. Of course, also with regards to medical devices, the legal requirements must also be adhered to. And in this respect, it is also always important that if there is a promotional activity of a person for a company, this also needs to be clarified when putting it on social media.
Thanks, Katerina. And finally, Talia, I understand that testimonials are permitted in the US. Are they common?
So testimonials are permitted from HCPs, from celebrities, from influencers, but you don't see, tons and tons of doctors giving testimonials. What's still more common, what you actually see in practice is, you might have a claim such as 9 out of 10 doctors recommend, or you might have celebrities endorsing the products, but most advertising is done with testimonials from patients rather than healthcare professionals. It is allowed and you do see it, but in practice, not as much as you would think, simply because it is allowed.
Thanks, Tali. I mean, that brings us to the end of our 4 examples. We have put together a summary briefly of some of the key points to note when advertising your medicines and medical devices. So we'll just run through these very quickly, and then we'll go to some of our questions. So you need to understand the local licensing rules and advertising rules in each country. As you will have heard, licensing requirements and advertising rules vary by country, and therefore it's key to understand the variations. Don't advertise prescription-only medicines in Europe, not even in social media. Comply with all of the advertising rules. Make sure that your content complies with advertising rules, just like all of your other advertising. Clearly identify as advertising, making disclosures. Content from the brand itself is obviously identifiable as advertising, but then there will be other content like we've talked about from brand ambassadors and influencers, which might not be so obvious when it's posted, and you'd need to add additional disclosures. Genuine, relevant, and in-brand messaging, just to keep in line with the rest of your marketing. You should be able to substantiate all of the claims that you are making in your own content, of course, but then also if you are adapting testimonial content through users, you need to make sure that any claims that are in that content are also compliant. Obtain consents for use. And localize your content, so make sure it's suitable for the local market and has the relevant restrictions in place. For example, in certain countries, like we've talked about, shutting off the like button or the comment section for posts in some countries. That's just a quick run through of what we've talked about. Let's go to some of our questions. We've got a couple of questions here that we can run through. Now, I mean, I can take one quite quickly. So we've got a question here that says, do you need consent from the user to share the post, i.e. to your own story, own brand profile? Now, the key here is to think about whether or not you're using the functionality of that social media platform. So all the users of social media platforms have signed up to the usability of that platform, and therefore when you say share to a story, if someone's post allows you to share to a story, that consent has already been given by being a user of that platform. If you're able to reshare to your timeline, again, the consent is already given. If you are looking to share, for example, from one social media platform into another and that functionality pops up, again, consent is already given. But if you are repurposing it and using it in a different way, that is when you need to obtain additional consent. So hopefully that answers your question there, but do pop in an additional question if it doesn't. Another question that we've got here is it says, could your team address how rules on comparative advertising play in the below topic. For example, using data from studies, including studies that are not head-to-head and that focus on one specific aspect of a medical device, for example, its usability and or its clinical impact. Does anyone want to pick this up? I mean, if not, I mean, just to get us started off.
I can say something from the Italian perspective. In Italy,
Sure.
comparative advertising is possible, is licit. The issue is about the way it's made. I mean, the example that has been, of course, posed is very tricky because actually it's not so objective. You know, you're focusing just on one characteristic of the product, and this is not, wouldn't be considered admissible comparative advertising in Italy. It has to be, of course, broad, covering all the aspects of the product, objective, and not focusing on maybe on one characteristic of the product.
Thanks, Diego. Anyone else?
I'll just say that the US, you know, if the FDA does want to see head-to-head clinical trial comparison. If you're going to make comparative claim, they would want to see both products having been part of the same trial. There might be exceptions to that, but that is generally the best practice. I imagine that would be the case more broadly, as Diego mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's right, Talia. I think it's a much fairer comparison. Gemma, is it the same in Spain?
Yeah, I was also going to mention the same. Yeah, of course, comparative promotion is admissible under Spanish law also, but it has to meet these requirements in the sense that the trial that supports the evidence that permits the promotion of comparative claims has to be, in this sense, face-to-face trial, because if not, it would not be meeting the requirements for comparative promotion.
Great, thank you. Another question that we've got here is regarding disease awareness. You mentioned that the requirement to refer to specific, not to refer to specific products or brands. Does that include the company brand? So again, I mean, from a general perspective, I think it's difficult not to mention a company brand, because if you are sharing information on social media, you're doing it through your company brand channel, and therefore by its nature, you're sharing the company brand when you put the content up. I think the key here is to note that you shouldn't have similar names for products that can be advertised and those that can't be advertised. And that is where a problem lies. So if you have similar branding, coloring, naming of prescription only products as with your OTC products and your overall brand, that's where some problems and confusion can arise. But if you are simply only using your umbrella brand and that's the channel through which you're sharing information, it's difficult not to have that visible. But I don't know if anyone else in the panel has a different view. No, sounds like
fully agreed, Sonal. Yeah, I can't imagine a situation where this is not linked to the company brand. Yeah, I was trying to think, but I can't imagine. Sorry.
It's okay, thanks. And then our last question here is, I think it links into the earlier question we talked about sharing content. What if they have shared the review in Trustpilot and then posting it? So I'm not sure whether you mean whether the user has posted it or whether the company has posted it here, but there are scenarios sometimes where you might have your web page and you have a section that sort of feeds in all the Trustpilot reviews, but it is clear that that is where the reviews are coming in from. I think it is a bit more difficult to see how that works in a social media post, because in a social media post, the user has to upload that content, whereas I think the Trustpilot review is one website to another website, unless you are asking whether we are taking testimonial content from Trustpilot and putting that into a social media post. If that's the question, I think yes, you would need the consent of the user, because what you are doing is you are taking content from a review page and bringing it in and making it advertising. So, you know, I would suggest that you do get consent in that scenario, unless the user terms of the platform where they're posting the review allow for you to use that content in your promotional materials. Anything else? Any more questions, or anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? No, well, so then on behalf of the whole panel here, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us today. We hope that you found the session interesting and informative. We'd love to hear from all of you further, so please do reach out to us if there is anything that we can do to assist you, or even if you just want to have an introductory catch up with us, we're happy to have a virtual coffee or an in real life coffee. So on that note, thanks very much everyone, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.